I was the last to know, and yet I was the only one who loved until the end. Do you know what it's like to work like a dog, to pay every penny of rent with your body aching, to come home in the cold of Paris with stiff fingers and a tired heart, only to discover that while you were cleaning toilets underground, your wife was moaning for her own brother in the room you fought to keep warm? Because I know. And that truth burned me silently for 40 years. I washed uniforms that smelled of disinfectant and sweat, and she washed her body with his touch. I spent nights counting coins to buy bread, and he ate from the plate I put on the table. They laughed at me, they laughed between the sheets. She kissed me with the mouth that whispered his name, and I smiled back. I smiled so I wouldn't cry. I smiled so I wouldn't die. One day I found his underwear in the hamper. It stank of sex and cowardice. And yet I told myself that it must have been old, that maybe he had come to take a bath there. Look at the level of humiliation a man accepts when he loves more than he should. I believed her lies because the truth would kill me. I pretended not to hear his footsteps in the hallway when I turned to the side, pretending to sleep, pretending. I was an actor in my own tragedy. They were the protagonists of my nightmare. I paid for the light that illuminated their kisses. I bought the wine she poured on his chest, and every night I prayed, not to be loved, but to forget that I existed. The world went on, time passed, but the pain remained embedded in me like a knife, slowly, mercilessly. And to this day, when I smell lavender, I remember the bath she took before giving herself to him. Sometimes we only start to die when we stop telling the truth, and I died a little every day. I died at the first muffled moan I heard through the door. I died when he looked into my eyes and pretended to respect me. I died when she said, "I love you," and turned to the side, with her heart in another body. And it was in that silence, in that house where even the walls judged me, that everything began to fall apart. Not with screams, but with looks, with absences, with lies that used my name. It was there, on that colorless night, that the memory began to swallow me, and I never went back to being who I was. I almost didn't have the courage to tell you this. I spent years swallowing everything in silence, thinking I was going to take this pain with me to a grave. But today, I'm here, talking, trying. Will anyone out there understand? Will anyone listen to an old man before he leaves for good? Shows that I'm not talking to myself. Leave your like and stay with me until the end, because there are still things that I have never told anyone. But today, I want to open my heart to you, and I know that you will continue to be my friend, listening to me and supporting me. I still remember the way the sun touched her shoulders that late afternoon. It was one of those days when the sky looks as if it had been washed with the tears of some tired saint. Everything so calm, so clean, so blue that it hurt to look at it. She was there, leaning against the white wall of the church, wearing a pale blue dress that swirled in the wind. The fabric was simple, but on her it looked like it was made of heaven. Claire. She wasn't the prettiest woman in town, but in that moment she looked like a miracle itself. I had my hat crumpled in my hand, my shoes dirty with mud, and my heart heavy with the bills that were already due at home. But when I saw that smile, for a second, I forgot about the hunger, the cold, my sick father. I even forgot about myself. She laughed in a way that made us want to laugh too, even without knowing why. There was something in her eyes, a kind of hidden sadness, like someone who had been beaten a lot in life, but still believed in Sunday mornings, in sung mass, in fresh bread on the table. I approached her because I couldn't bear not to. She said something stupid, the kind of thing we only say when we're afraid to say what we really feel. Claire looked at me like someone who sees too much, and I trembled inside, not out of shame, but because right there in front of the church, I felt for the first time that I could be someone worthwhile. She was the first one to say my name. Gérard, right? And only then did I realize that I wasn't as invisible as I thought. We started seeing each other at church, then at the markets, on the afternoons when she bought bread for her mother, and I pretended I was just passing through. It only took a few weeks for me to know that I wanted that woman to share my life with. And when I say share my life, I didn't just mean the beautiful moments. It was sharing the onion cut with a dull knife, the old blanket in winter, the hidden sobs after an unfair day. Claire seemed to have been made to fit what I lacked. She spoke little, but each word she said carried a weight that stayed with me. When she told me that her father had abandoned the family when she was still young, that her mother washed clothes for others to support her 3 siblings, I felt ashamed of the times I had complained about my own burden. She was strong, but not hard. She was delicate without being fragile, and I fell in love with that entire contradiction. The first time I held her hand, it was by accident. We were sharing a piece of bread in the bandstand in the square, and our hands brushed. She didn't take it away, neither did I. We stood there, looking at each other like 2 fools, like 2 survivors who, by some miracle, found each other. I proposed to her with a ring I bought from a friend who sold stolen trinkets from Paris. I'm not proud of it, but it was the best I could give her, and she accepted, with a smile so sad and so happy at the same time that to this day I wonder what was going on behind those eyes. We got married on a cold March morning. There were no flowers, no party, no luxury, just our closest friends, an old priest, and her hands shaking as she said, "I do." And even with an empty stomach and a holy coat, I thought I had it all, because I believed, truly, that love was enough. And for a long time, that was enough. It was enough to have her there, in the kitchen scrubbing the pots and pans, or sewing the clothes she got from her boss in town. It was enough to come home after 12 hours of work and see her. With her feet curled up on the couch listening to the radio, she would wait for me with tea, sometimes in silence, other times with a kiss. And I thought, that's it, I've won. But there were days when she was different. Her gaze was a little distant, her head lowered. I asked her if everything was okay. She said yes, and I believed her, because a working man doesn't have time to doubt, because too much love can also blind. And I loved her more than I loved myself. I remember one day in particular. She was washing clothes in the backyard, and I arrived early. I watched from afar. She was scrubbing a white shirt hard, as if she wanted to erase the entire world from that fabric. Her hair was tied up with a blue scarf, her arms wet up to the elbows. And suddenly she stopped. She stared at the soap as if she were looking at the past. I called her. She was startled. She smiled without showing her teeth, and she went back to scrubbing. I never understood that moment, but it stayed. With me, time passed. I got a second job. I started arriving home later and later. Sometimes she was already asleep. Other times she would wait for me with puffy eyes. She said it was just tiredness. I believed her, because that's what love is. It's trusting until it hurts. She started to be quieter, less kissing, less hugging. She said she had a headache. She said she missed her mother. She said everything except the truth. And I, stupid, thought it was a phase, that it was the cold, that it was life. I was a happy man, happy and blind. I worked like a slave, but I came home with my heart full, because I thought there was someone waiting for me, that I had a woman who loved me, that I had a home, that I had a truth, and all of that was just an illusion. But back then I didn't know yet, and that's what hurts the most. Having believed so much, having given everything, having bet my soul, and not having seen that little by little it was no longer mine. Henri was my older brother. We slept in the same room for 14 years. When I got married, he was devastated. But since he was single and unemployed, I let him live with us, out of pity. I thought I was doing the right thing. We were raised together, sharing bread, beatings, slippers, and fever. He was my blood, my oldest mirror, even with all his mistakes, even with the sour temper he had carried since he was a boy. Deep down, I thought that if I gave him a place in my house, maybe he would finally feel like he belonged. Maybe he would stop being lost, like he always was. At first it was strange, but bearable. Henri slept on a mattress stuck on the living room floor, and spent the day smoking on the balcony and complaining about life. Claire, peaceful as she was, tried to be cordial. She made dinner for 3, cleaned the house with double the care, and pretended that the cigarettes didn't bother her. I found that beautiful about her. Her patience, her kindness to those who didn't deserve it, but little by little, something started to change. Little things, gestures, silences, touches that shouldn't have lasted more than a second, but lasted 2. Crossed glances that looked away too quickly, laughter that came out of nowhere when I entered the room. I noticed, but I kept quiet, because Henri was my brother, and Claire was my wife, and the world was already beating me too much for me to imagine that the 2 of them could be beating me too. But the truth is that love, when it is too blind, begins to lose its sense of smell, and the fear of being right is greater than the courage to see. I would come home with my skin covered in soot from work, my body crying out for a bath, but my soul grateful for having a roof over my head, a wife and a bowl of soup. And there he was, my brother, on the couch, legs spread, laughing out loud at some stupid radio program, with Claire by his side, folding clothes like they were a couple in a soap opera. And I was the tired supporting actor who held the stage. There was a night I will never forget. It was autumn. The rain was beating on the tiles like impatient fingers. I woke up thirsty and went downstairs to get some water. The kitchen light was on, and I heard a murmur, 2 whispers, muffled laughter. When I went in, they were silent. Claire had her hand on his shoulder. She said he had woken up scared by a nightmare, and she went to see if he was okay. I smiled. I smiled like an idiot. I drank my water. I went back to bed and lay down next to the betrayal without knowing. Sometimes I think it wasn't out of pity that I let Henri live with us. It was out of guilt. He was always the son who didn't make it, and I was the good one, the responsible one, the one who put up with everything. Maybe deep down I wanted to give him what my parents didn't. A home, a little dignity. But dignity isn't given to someone who already feeds off the misery of others. Claire started to dress differently. Tighter clothes, brighter lipstick. She said it was to make herself feel better, that married women also have the right to dress up. And I agreed. I always agreed. Because loving too much sometimes means allowing too much. Henri started to spend more time at home. He stopped looking for a job. He would spend his afternoons in the kitchen, listening to music with her. And I was always away, always absent, working like a beast of burden to support a nest egg that was no longer mine. The worst part is that there was no shouting, there was no scene, everything was silent, cold, surgical. They erased me from their lives with an almost respectful care. They excluded me without pushing, they betrayed me without touching me, and I accepted it, because deep down I no longer had the strength, because I was afraid of being alone. Because I still believed that if I pretended enough, maybe it would all turn out to be a lie. There were days when I would hear them laughing in the bedroom, and I would pretend it was the radio. There were days when I would find a different shirt button in the laundry basket, and I would tell myself it was old. Once I found a letter, handwritten. It said, "He left early today. Come to my room after 5. I burned it. I burned it before I finished reading it, because it was easier to destroy the paper than to face what was written. You know, they say that the worst blind person is the one who doesn't want to see. But I went, or further. I was the man who saw everything and still closed his eyes, because I preferred the silence of pain to the shame of truth. And when I remember those days, I don't just feel angry. I feel ashamed of myself, for having given shelter, bread, and love to 2 traitors with light souls, for having been the clown in a play where only they knew the script. And sometimes what kills me the most is not what they did, it's what I let happen. She laughed a lot at his jokes. She even started getting dressed up to go to the bakery. Once I saw her fixing her hair when he came into the room, but I thought it was just my imagination. I thought so many things. I thought that smile was for me, that that new skirt was to please me, that the new perfume, which she never wore when she went out with me, was just a silly whim of a woman wanting to feel pretty again. And when I saw her fixing her hair in the living room mirror right after Henry came in, I froze inside. She didn't even notice that I was in the hallway. She ran her hand over her neck, pulled her blouse up over her shoulder, took that last look, and turned her body with a smile that I hadn't seen in a long time, but that now appeared too easily for him. At the time, I swallowed it as naturally as we swallow a burning sob. I didn't want to think about it. I went straight to my room and sat on the edge of the bed, trying to convince myself that it was an exaggeration, that my head was heavy, from work, from the routine, from the hard life, and that too much jealousy is only bad. But it wasn't jealousy, it was instinct, and still I kept quiet. I started to notice other things, small, even silly. She laughed in a different way when he told stories from the past, even if they were about other women. She rolled her eyes in an almost playful way, as if challenging, as if provoking. I was there, sitting at the table, with the soup getting cold on the plate, and she, locking eyes with my brother like two teenagers in love on the school playground, and I, with the spoon in my hand, not knowing whether to keep eating or get up and ask something. But what was I going to ask? Do you love him? Or am I the only one going crazy here? She said I was becoming bitter, too quiet. That work was consuming me, and I believed her. Because yes, I was tired. I would come home with my shoulders hunched over, my head heavy, my feet aching. But I still looked at her as if I were looking at the only thing that makes life worth living. And yet I was treated like a grumpy old man who no longer knew how to smile, while he, Henri, was the funny one, the free one, the light one. He might not work, but he knew how to enjoy life, as she would say. One time I was surprised by a different smell in the air. I came in early from work. My boss had let me off early because of a flood that was threatening the subway, and the perfume that filled the room was not one of the ones she usually wore. It was stronger, too sweet. I felt like I was invading a house that was no longer mine. She came quickly from the kitchen, her face a little red, her hair a little loose, and said she was testing a new cologne she had gotten from a neighbor. I said, "That's great," and went to take a shower, but the smell remained engraved in my memory like a warning I didn't want to hear. She started going out more often. He said he was going to the market, but he came back with things I didn't see any use for. He said he was stopping by a friend's house, but his eyes were shining like someone who had been somewhere else. There was one time when I forgot my lunchbox at home and ran back before noon. I found the door locked from the inside. I knocked, I waited. When she opened it, her hair was wet, and she was wearing a shirt that wasn't hers. He said he had spilled some sauce and decided to take a shower. I believed him, because believing hurt less than distrusting. I started to observe more, to pay attention to the silences, the pauses, her hands that trembled when Henri said something stupid. I noticed that she waited for him to come home, that she always looked at her watch 5 minutes before he was supposed to arrive, that his dish was always the first to be served, that she got irritated when I spoke badly about him. Once, I joked that he seemed like a guest who would never leave. She remained silent. Then she said, "He's only here because he wasn't as lucky as you." Lucky. The luck, she said, was to have a job that consumed me, a marriage that deceived me, a home that only existed on paper. For her, luck was to have a hard but dignified life, and she preferred the shadow of my brother, who didn't pay rent, didn't wash the dishes, didn't contribute anything, but knew how to smile in the right way at the right time. I started sleeping less. I would walk around the house at night, like an old dog smelling danger. I would put my ear to the doors. I would watch the dirty glasses in the sink. I would read between the lines of the notes on the fridge. Everything was a clue. Everything was a warning. And I still insisted on calling it paranoia. And then one day I caught her writing, sitting at the kitchen table, paper folded in half, blue pen. When she saw me, she tried to hide it. She said it was a shopping list, but it wasn't. I knew it wasn't, because I saw his name in the corner of the paper. Henri. I didn't see the rest. She tore up the paper before I could say anything, and she looked at me as if apologizing, without opening her mouth. That's when I understood. I didn't need proof. My body already knew. My soul had already been betrayed. And yet I sat next to her, ate the soup, and said that the salt was just right, because love, when it becomes an addiction, makes us complicit in our own humiliation. I was coming home early from my shift at the factory. It was a Tuesday, one of those days when the sky seems to weigh down on the city. It was raining lightly, and the subway tracks were covered in warm steam rising from the concrete. I had a bad migraine attack. It had been building up in my temples for days, throbbing like a warning of what was to come. My boss let me off early, told me to go home and rest. Little did he know that that rest would cost me my soul. I caught the 4:42 train. It was almost empty. I sat near the door, looking at my face reflected in the glass. And for a moment, I was startled. I was old, older than I remembered. My face was haggard, my eyes colorless, my forehead full of lines that looked as if they had been carved by some ancient sadness. I ran my hand over my face, took a deep breath, and convinced myself that it was just fatigue. I got home before 5. It was raining harder now. The cobblestones were glistening wet, and each step I took made a hollow sound, as if the city were listening to me arrive. I walked up the stairs in silence. I avoided slamming the door. I didn't want to startle anyone. I even thought about surprising Claire, maybe kissing her while she was making dinner. I imagined her in the kitchen, singing some old French song, her apron dirty with flour and her hair tied up in a mess. That was the image that kept me going. It was this love that kept me going, or what I thought was still love. But when I walked in, I smelled it. It wasn't the smell of food. It was perfume, strong, masculine, a scent I knew because it was the same one my brother had worn since he was young, when he'd gone out to parties with the bottle hidden from his father. The house was silent. The lights were off. No banging of pots, no radio, no footsteps. Just the sound of the rain outside. And something else. A laugh. Then another. Muffled laughs. Suppressed laughs. Laughs that didn't belong at that time of day, or in that place. I went up slowly. My heart was already beating differently, like someone who senses danger but still tries to call it paranoia. With each step, my body trembled more. When I reached the hallway, the light in the room was on, but dim, as if covered with a sheet, hidden, the door half open, and it was through that space, too small to contain a tragedy, that I saw, that I felt, that I died. She was laughing. Her hair was loose, sweaty, wrapped in a sheet I had bought at the flea market 2 months earlier, sitting on the bed I had made with my own hands, the bed where I had dreamed of growing old with her. Henri was lying behind her, shirtless, smiling, like someone who no longer cared about hiding it. He was touching her intimately, naturally, as if she were his, as if she had never been mine. I stood there, still, my hand still on the railing, my mouth half open, my breath caught in my chest. A heat rose up my spine, as if my entire body had been drenched in blood. My stomach turned to stone, my vision blurred. It was as if I were dreaming a nightmare within a nightmare. The pain was so great that for a moment I wondered if it was even real, or if my heart had gotten tired and was playing tricks on me before it stopped beating. They didn't see me. Or they pretended not to see me. I don't know. Maybe they were so immersed in their own cowardice that they thought they were untouchable. I could have gone in, screamed, broken everything, hit him, hit her. But I didn't do anything. I just went down. I went down the stairs with my legs weak, as if my body was emptying from the inside. I went to the sidewalk, sat on the curb, and let the rain soak me like an old, abandoned, sick dog. I stayed there until it got dark, until my head stopped throbbing, until my soul stopped screaming. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I didn't think. I just existed. I just breathed, because I didn't even have the courage to die that night. In my head, the images repeated themselves. The sheets, the laughter, the touch, her gaze. She was no longer my Claire. That woman I saw there. She no longer knew me. And Henri was just a faceless figure, a shadow that I myself had invited in. I had given shelter, food, and confidence to the man who, deep down, had always envied what I was, and she let him take everything from me. Dawn arrived. When I got home, the light in the bedroom was off. She was sleeping alone, as if nothing had happened. He was snoring on the mattress in the living room, and I lay on the kitchen floor, with my head resting against the closet, my heart in pieces, and the certainty that on that day I had buried the last piece of myself. You know, there's pain that doesn't bleed, but leaves us with a taste of iron in our mouths. That was the first time I felt that taste, a taste that never went away, a taste that to this day makes me clench my fist when I remember it, a taste of having been made of nothing by the one I loved the most. I didn't go in. I didn't scream. I didn't break anything. I just walked down the stairs, slowly, one step at a time, as if each step were a goodbye, as if every piece of wood beneath my feet whispered, "You've lost." The air in the house was no longer mine. Her scent, the muffled sound of his laughter, the light in the room where I had dreamed of dying beside the woman I loved, all of it now drove me away with cruel gentleness. It wasn't fury, it was silent contempt. Up there they continued. Maybe they knew I saw them. Maybe they didn't. But at that moment, it didn't matter. What destroyed me wasn't the act itself. It was the fact that even knowing I existed, they continued. She betrayed me with her eyes open. He stole me with a smile on his lips. And me, I left, without making a sound, because those who worked like donkeys also learn to suffer in silence. I grabbed my coat, the old one, with worn wool on the sleeves, smelling of mold and tiredness. I left without closing the door properly. The lock clicked by itself in the wind. The street was cold, wet from the late afternoon rain. Every drop that ran down the gutters seemed to mock me, as if the whole world knew what had happened inside. I walked slowly. I was in no hurry. I had no direction. I just wanted to get out of my body, get out of my skin, tear myself away from myself. I sat in the square, that same square where years before I had proposed to Claire with a second-hand ring and a promise of a simple life. I sat on the same bench, but now, alone, with my back soaked, my eyes dry, and my chest overflowing, and there in that darkness covered in dew, I understood what it was like to die in life. I didn't cry. I couldn't. The tears got stuck in my throat like a bone, an eternal choking that doesn't even let water go down. My eyes wanted to, but pride wouldn't let me. Fear wouldn't let me. Shame wouldn't let me. Because when a man is betrayed by his wife and his own brother, he has no tears. He has a hole, a vacuum that consumes everything inside. I stood there until the sky began to lighten. I watched the stars disappear one by one, as if they too were hiding from my shame. I watched the sun rise behind the twisted trees, and the world moved on. Cars drove by again. Newspapers were thrown at the doors. The baker opened his shop. And I stood there, invisible, dead, clothed in a body that still breathed but no longer lived. I could have made a scene. I could have gone in, dragged him by his hair, and screamed for the whole neighborhood to hear. But I didn't. Not out of weakness, but out of a deeper pain, a pain that doesn't want revenge, only silence, because sometimes the soul breaks in such a way that even the scream becomes a whisper. And in that silence, I said goodbye to her. I said goodbye to him. I said goodbye to myself. I remained there like a ghost in my own house. We pretended to live a life that had already died. She served me coffee as always, said, "Good morning," without looking me in the eye, folded my clothes with the same precision as before, but everything about her screamed distance. And me, I responded with a tired smile, a murmured, "Thank you," an absence that I learned to wear like clothing. Because when the heart is betrayed, the body learns to survive automatically. I woke up early, as always. I grabbed my cap, my coat, my lunchbox with cold rice and reheated meat, and left for work with my back bent, not only from tiredness, but from contempt. I walked the streets as if carrying a cross that no one saw. Everyone thought I was just another honest, hard-working, dedicated man. No one knew that inside I had already been buried without a coffin. Henri was still there, relaxed, smiling, making jokes in the living room, watching TV as if nothing had happened, and she washed the dishes while he talked nonsense and laughed. She laughed like she hadn't laughed at me in months. Her laugh was like a knife, and I was the only one bleeding. Sometimes at night I would hear them talking quietly. In the bedroom, in the hallway, I don't know where. Their voices were muffled, but the tone was one of complicity. It was no longer a secret. It was no longer a betrayal. It was everyday life. It was routine. It was mockery. And I pretended. I kept paying the bills, bringing bread home, fixing the leaking sink, pushing through life. Do you know why? Because the rent was due. But love had already been evicted. I was the only person living in an empty home. The only one who still believed in something that only existed in the past. There were days when I slept on the couch in the living room. I said my back hurt, that the mattress was making me sick. But the truth is that I couldn't stand lying next to her, feeling her smell, hearing her breathing, and remembering that body that was once my world, now belonged to someone else, to my brother, to the man I shared my childhood with, to the bastard I let in. I began to collect silences. At breakfast, she spoke little. At dinner, he laughed to himself, and I just listened. Each silence was a scream that I held back. Each gesture of theirs was a stab that I covered up with a sip of water, with a fork hitting the plate, with some excuse. I came to believe that maybe it was my fault, that I wasn't good enough, that I had become grumpy, tired, too bitter, that they had found each other in my absence, that I had lost the woman I loved, because I had become invisible inside my own house, and that destroyed me more than the betrayal, the fact that even after everything I still wanted to understand, to justify, to save the memory of what we were, to save her, to save him, and let myself sink alone in silence. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and no one said anything. There was no confrontation, there was no apology, there was no fight, just a slow, cowardly dissolution of life. I would come home from work and find the table set, dinner made, the cutlery in place. But everything was mechanical, cold, dead. It was like living in a soap opera without a script. Every object in that house seemed to laugh at me. The kettle, the curtains, the old photos on the wall. Everything carried the weight of an old lie, a dirty memory of a love that had been trampled on without mercy. I tried to leave once. I tried to gather some clothes, put away my documents, think of a room in a boarding house or any corner where I could breathe without the smell of betrayal. But when I looked in the mirror, I saw a weak old man, a man afraid of being alone, a man who preferred to live with pain than face total abandonment. So I stayed. I stayed like a dead man who no one buried. I stayed like someone waiting for a miracle that will never come. To this day, I wonder if that was my greatest act of cowardice, or my greatest proof of love. One day, he left, just like that, without announcing it, without a fight, without a word to me. I woke up, and the mattress in the living room was empty, folded in a corner, as if it had never been used. The window was half open, the curtains were flapping, and a strange silence hung over the house, like the smell of old things that we can't get out of the closet. He was gone, and he took with him the little that was left of my dignity. She left no clothes, no note, no formal goodbye. Just a letter, a crumpled envelope made of cheap paper, thrown on top of the dresser in our bedroom. Yes, our bedroom, where she would find it. Claire wasn't home that day. She had left early to buy bread, or to act out another chapter of the lie we had become. I was on break. Fate wanted it that way. Or maybe God, tired of seeing me crawl, decided it was time to show me everything, to lay bare, without any more veils, the truth. The envelope was not sealed. It was simply folded, like someone who writes something and decides, out of pride or cowardice, not to seal it. Like someone who expects someone to read it, even if they shouldn't. And I read it. I read it because I needed to, because it was the only piece of truth I could get from them, because I could no longer bear living in the shadows of a theater that I myself financed. It was just one sheet of paper. His handwriting was ugly and hurried, as it always was. It began with her name, without nicknames, without affection, Claire, and it continued straight, dry, cruel. I can't stand pretending that we can continue anymore. You look at me like I'm the one to blame, but he always knew, from the beginning. He knew, and he never did anything, never said a word. He just lowered his head and carried on, as if he was apologizing for loving you first. My hands were shaking. The paper crumpled between my sweaty fingers, but I kept reading. This doesn't make sense anymore. You feel sorry for him, and I feel ashamed. We crossed the line, and he just suffered in silence. And the worst part is that we let him. We watched him slowly die and pretended it wasn't our business. Forgive me, Claire, but I'm leaving, because what we had was selfishness, and I can't stand to see his face anymore. That's when it all fell apart. Not like a bomb, not with an explosion, but with a dry, silent crack inside my chest. They knew, both of them. From the beginning, they knew I knew, and yet they kept going. They looked me in the eyes, day after day, night after night, and smiled. They served me coffee, shared a table, said good night to me, and they knew. They knew I was there, dying inside, carrying a weight that wasn't even mine, and they didn't do anything, neither did she, nor did he. They just let me. They let me waste away in silence. They let me convince myself that I was crazy, exaggerated, paranoid. They let me doubt my own sanity. I closed my eyes for a moment, with the paper still in my hands, and felt the world spin. A bitter taste rose in my throat. It wasn't nausea. It was disgust. It was the nausea of the raw truth, of absolute certainty, of the sentence that had been denied. To me, for so long, I sat on the edge of the bed where everything happened, the bed that betrayed me without moving. And I stayed there, motionless, the paper on my lap, my soul fallen at my feet. I didn't cry. I had already learned to keep my tears in my pocket, along with the promises she made and never kept. But inside I was just a piece. I was just a ruin. When she came back, I noticed that her steps were lighter, maybe because he had left, maybe because she thought that. Now everything would go back to normal. I didn't talk about the letter. I didn't look at her. I didn't ask her anything. I just handed her the envelope. She read it, standing up, with a steady hand. Her eyes didn't move. She finished reading, folded the paper, and put it in the drawer, as if it were just another expired receipt. She didn't say anything. Neither did I. And that silence was the funeral. At that moment I knew for sure. She had never loved me the way I loved her. She had never seen me the way I saw her. She had loved what I gave, what I represented, the stability, the roof over my head, the illusion of a home. But not me. Never me. Henri left. But the damage remained. It remained in the walls, in the towels, in the smell of the curtains. It remained in the empty space in the room where he used to leave his slippers, in the silverware that was now left on the table on the left side of the sofa where she used to sit, too close to him. And in me, the letter remained, the memory, the humiliation. Today, sometimes, I find myself rereading the sentences from that letter from memory, as if they were tattooed on me, because they are. Each word was a shovel of dirt over what was left of my heart. If he knew from the beginning, why did he never say anything? Because I thought love could endure anything. Because I thought silence was the best way to protect what little was left. Because I became an accomplice to my own destruction. Day 1. I waited for everyone to fall asleep. The house was plunged into that thick silence that only exists after betrayal, when even the furniture seems to carry shame. The clock on the wall read 2 in the morning. The ticking seemed louder that night. Every second that passed told me that I no longer had a place there, that that roof was no longer mine, that that woman was no longer mine, that the past I carried on my back had become a weight that no one wanted to help me bear. I got up, quietly. I didn't turn on the light. I just went to the closet, where my things were always on the right side, out of habit, out of respect, out of fear. I grabbed the old leather bag I'd gotten when I was still young, before I'd even met Claire. It still smelled of mothballs and time. I put inside what I could fit: 3 shirts, 2 pairs of pants, the pair of shoes I wore on Sundays, and the dented aluminum lunchbox I always took to work. I didn't take a photo. I didn't take a souvenir, because I knew that any trace of that house would continue to rot me inside. Before leaving, I took one last look at the room. She was sleeping, facing the other way, as she had always done in the last few months. Distant, cold, empty. Even when she was asleep, she seemed to ignore me. Next to her, his pillow was still there. Even though he was absent, he still took up space. He still shared that bed with me. I was just an intruder in my own home. I walked down the stairs without looking back. Each step hurt. Not in my body. I couldn't feel anything in my body anymore, but in my memory. It was there that I helped paint the walls. It was there that I carried the closet on my back. It was there that I heard her nephew's first cry when he was born. It was there that I promised eternal love. And now I was just another body leaving in the middle of the night. I opened the door slowly. The cold air from the street cut my face like a razor. It was winter. The dawn seemed to swallow me. But for the first time in a long time, I breathed, a painful but free air. I was alone, for the first time truly alone, and I knew I would never come back. Not to look for a forgotten shirt, not for one last look. Nothing. I lived in a rented room for 40 years, a room that smelled of old paint and had a roof that leaked when it rained. It had a hard bed, a rickety chair, and a battery-powered radio that I used to pretend I had company. I worked as a servant, a delivery boy, janitor. Every day I woke up before the sun, drank a black coffee without sugar, and left with an empty lunchbox in my hand, not out of necessity, but as a punishment. I chose to keep working. I chose to keep busy, because when you work too much, there's less time to remember. I never loved again. I never trusted again, not for lack of opportunity. Some women appeared, widows, separated, lonely neighbors, but I was already fed up, full of fear, full of wounds, full of silences that no one could bear to hear, and deep down, I didn't want to explain either. I didn't want to tell, because to tell I would have to relive, and I already died once in that house. The years passed, and slowly I disappeared from the world. No relatives sought me out, no friends insisted. It was as if I had been erased, as if my name had been scratched from the book of life that I had once written with so much effort. But do you know what's sadder? Even though I survived, even though I got up, even though I paid every penny of my pain with dignity, loneliness continued to await me at the end of every day. The silence of the rented room embraced me when I closed the door, and sometimes When the light went out, I could still smell her. The perfume she wore when she got ready to go to the bakery or to meet him. I worked until the last day. The boss sent me away when he saw that my hands were shaking more than they should. He said it was time to rest. But resting, for those who no longer live inside, is just waiting for death in silence. Today, when I look back, I don't feel anger, nor forgiveness. I feel emptiness, an emptiness that echoes, an echo that no one hears anymore. And if someone asked me if I started over, I would say yes. I started over like someone who picks up the pieces of a broken glass, knowing that it will never hold water again. But still, we try. Do you think that, in my place, you would have had the courage to stay? Or would you have left too, carrying what little was left of your soul? Today, at 81 years old, I still wonder, if I had screamed, would it have hurt less? If that day, instead of going down the stairs in silence, I had broken down the door, made the world hear, broken the furniture, thrown him out, spat in her face, demanded explanations, would that have been fairer to me? Would there have been any dignity left amidst the shards? Or would the pain have been the same, just louder? I spent my whole life trying to understand where I went wrong, because I did, I know. I was wrong to trust too much. I was wrong to love too much. I was wrong to protect too much. I was wrong to believe that love alone can sustain an entire house, that kindness is enough, that loyalty saves, that silence is proof of strength. It isn't. Silence sometimes is just the tomb of those who still breathe. And the worst part is that no one saw me die, because I didn't scream, I didn't cry in public, I didn't beg, I just disappeared. I just looked away. I just accepted, and I started to fade away, one day after another, one piece at a time. Today I walk slowly with my knees giving out, my spine bent, and my eyes cloudy. But it's inside that I'm older. Inside, I'm over 1,000 years old, because every night I slept badly on that borrowed mattress. Every bread with margarine I ate alone. Every Christmas in silence. Every forgotten birthday. All of this pushed me further away from myself. I became small, invisible, a name erased from every list. There are days when I sit on the edge of my bed and look at the floor, as if looking for something I lost and never found again. Maybe my courage, maybe my voice, maybe that man who once had hope. And what hurts the most is knowing that, deep down, I didn't want revenge. I just wanted her to have looked me in the eyes and said, "I loved you, but I didn't know how to protect you." That she would have hugged me and said, "Forgive me, I was weak." That someone, for once in my life, would have acknowledged my pain. But no, I was the silent donkey, the useful fool, the man who held the house together while he was erased from it. I was the carpet. I was the stepping stone. I was the shadow that no one thanked. And today, with my wrinkled skin and my chest full of scars that no one sees, I just wonder, what would have happened if I had chosen to scream? Maybe I would have bled. Maybe I would have been arrested. Maybe I would have lost everything anyway. But at least I would have said it. I would have told myself. I would have saved myself from becoming that old man who talks to himself in the dark, repeating names that no longer belong to me. It was my silence that killed me slowly. Not them, not her, not the betrayal. It was my cowardice in not reacting, in not demanding, in not defending myself. Today, sometimes a young man helps me cross the street, and I smile. I thank him. But inside, I want to say, "Kid, never love someone more than you love yourself. Never silence your pain just to keep someone close, because when you swallow a scream, it rots you inside. And that's why I'm telling you everything now, because if anyone hears this story, maybe they still have time to scream, to say something, to get out before they get lost. You listen to me until the end. And that changes everything for me. Telling this hurt, but hiding it for so long hurt even more. It's strange, spending your life swallowing your scream and only now, with a weak voice and time slipping through your fingers, having the courage to speak. I don't know who you are or where you're listening to me, but just knowing that someone has stayed this far makes my silence seem less heavy, as if for a moment I stopped being just an old man with too many memories and not enough hugs. Comment here with the word true if you've ever had to pretend that everything was fine just so you wouldn't lose the one you loved. Leave your like, follow the channel. Maybe someone else needs to hear this. Maybe somewhere there is another hidden heart needing a story like this to breathe again. And if this already hurt you, get ready, because the next story is the cruelest one I've ever told. In the video that appears now, I confess something that to this day I find it hard to breathe to remember.